I was threading a needle when the message came through. Just a quick buzz from my phone, sitting on the cluttered table of my sewing room, but it hit me like a pinprick straight to the heart. Ethan's name lit up the screen, and for a split second I smiled, thinking it might be a note about his graduation plans or a quick check-in. But when I opened it, the words froze me in place. "Mom, please don't come to my graduation. It's easier this way. I don't want any fuss." I read it again, then a third time, hoping I'd misread something, that there'd be a follow-up message saying, "Just kidding, Mom. Can't wait to see you there." But nothing came. My hands trembled as I set the needle. Down, the thread slipping from my fingers. I sat there, surrounded by scraps of fabric and half-finished dresses, trying to make sense of it. What kind of fuss did he think I'd cause? Was it the way I dressed, my patched-up cardigans and sensible shoes, my job as a seamstress, stitching prom dresses and curtains for half the town? Or was it just me, my face, my voice, my whole existence, that embarrassed him now? I'm 60 years old, and for 25 of those years, I've been Ethan's mom. Just the two of us, ever since his dad passed when he was 4. I raised him alone in this small North Carolina town, working late nights at my sewing machine, skipping dinners to make ends meet. I sold my grandmother's old Singer machine to cover his high school textbooks, cheered myself hoarse at every basketball game, even when my throat was sore and my shoes were falling apart. I was there for every moment, his first dunk, his science fair ribbons, the night he cried over a broken heart, and now this. A single sentence telling me to stay away from the biggest day of his life. I picked up the phone, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I wanted to ask, "What do you mean? Why would I embarrass you?" But the words wouldn't come. I typed, "Are you sure? I'd love to be there," then deleted it. I tried again. "I understand, but I'm so proud of you." Deleted that too. What could I say? If he thought I'd make a scene, maybe the kindest thing I could do was give him what he wanted. So I sent back 2 words. "All right, I understand." Then I added, "I love you," because even in that moment I couldn't not say it. I set the phone down and looked around my sewing room. Spools of thread, a pile of fabric scraps, the hum of the old radio in the corner. It was all so familiar, so safe, but now it felt like a cage. I'd spent years stitching together a life for Ethan, thread by thread, and now he cut me out of his with a single text. I didn't cry, not then. I just sat there, the silence pressing in, feeling like I'd been uninvited from the story I'd spent my whole life writing. That text from Ethan sat heavy in my chest, like a spool of thread I couldn't unwind. As I folded a half-stitched skirt in my sewing room, my mind drifted back to the years when it was just us, me and my boy, Maggie and Ethan, against the world. Back when his smile was my sunrise, and his laughter was the only music I needed. How did we go from that to a message telling me to stay away? I was 25 when I became a widow, left with a 4-year-old Ethan and a heart full of grief. His dad's accident took more than my husband. It took our savings, our plans, our safety net. But Ethan, he was my reason to keep going. We built a life in this little North Carolina town, just the two of us, in a house that creaked but held us close. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours, filled with love stitched into every corner. I used to make Ethan costumes for school plays, superhero capes, pirate vests, even a lopsided lion's mane for a Christmas pageant. He'd twirl around, grinning, saying, "Mom, you're magic with a needle." I'd laugh and tuck a note into his backpack, something silly like, "You're my favorite superhero." Love, Mom. He kept those notes, you know. I found them years later in an old tin box under his bed, creased and faded, like treasures he couldn't bear to throw away. That box told me I was doing something right. Every night, I'd sit at my sewing machine after he went to bed, stitching, dresses for neighbors or hemming curtains to pay the bills. My hands ached. My eyes burned. But I'd check on Ethan first, his little chest rising and falling under a quilt I'd made from scraps. I missed dinners sometimes, gave him the last slice of bread, but he never went to bed hungry. I made sure of that. When money got tight, I sold my grandmother's antique sewing machine to buy his textbooks. I told him it was no big deal, but I cried that night, alone in the dark. I was at every basketball game too, cheering until my voice gave out. My clothes were never new, patched sweaters, scuffed shoes, but Ethan didn't care. He'd scan the bleachers, find me, and wave with a grin that made every late night worth it. Once, after a game-winning shot, he ran over, sweaty and beaming, and threw his arms around me. "I'm going to graduate college someday, Mom," he said, his breath warm against my shoulder. "I'll walk across that stage and make you proud." I hugged him tight, believing we'd always be that team, that nothing could unravel us. We weren't perfect. There were slammed doors, teenage moods, nights when I wondered if I was enough. But we had a rhythm, a bond that felt unbreakable. When he got his acceptance letter to that big university in Atlanta, we danced in the kitchen, laughing until we couldn't breathe. I took on extra sewing jobs to help with tuition, never telling him how my back ached or how I skipped doctors, visits to save money. I didn't want him to worry. I just wanted him to soar. Sitting there in my sewing room, that tin box of notes still tucked away in his old room, I couldn't understand it. How did we go from those days, those hugs, those promises, to a text that cut me out of his life? What had I done to make him think I didn't belong on his biggest day? The question hung there, heavy as an unfinished seam with no answer in sight. Ethan's text was like a loose thread in a seam. You don't notice it at first, but once you pull, the whole thing starts to come apart. I kept replaying it in my head, trying to pinpoint when things changed, when my boy started pulling away. It wasn't one big moment, not a fight or a slammed door. It was quieter, sneakier, like a seam unraveling stitch by stitch. And looking back, I see it started the moment he left for college. That first semester, I drove up to Atlanta to visit him. I was nervous, my old station wagon rattling along the highway, a basket of homemade biscuits, and a photo album of Ethan's childhood tucked in the back seat. The campus was overwhelming. Tall buildings, students in crisp jackets, everyone moving like they had somewhere important to be. I felt out of place in my faded dress and worn flats, but I squared my shoulders. I was there for Ethan. He met me at the main gate, taller somehow, his hair neater, his clothes sharper. He gave me a quick hug, more a pat than an embrace, and said, "Come on, Mom, let's meet some friends. Just be chill, okay?" I laughed it off, thinking he was joking, but his eyes didn't meet mine. We walked to a courtyard where his friends were waiting, confident, polished kids with expensive watches and easy laughs. Ethan introduced me fast, barely pausing. "This is my mom." Then he launched into a story about his econ class, like I was just a footnote. One of the boys asked, You from Atlanta too, Mrs. Sullivan? I shook my head. No, a small town in North Carolina. I'm a seamstress there. Ethan let out a sharp laugh, strange and forced. Yeah, Mom's like the queen of thread and needle, he said. But the way he said queen felt like a jab, not a compliment. I smiled, but something in my chest tightened. Later, at a campus cafe, I pulled out the photo album. I brought this for you, Ethan. Just some memories. He glanced at it, then pushed it back. Thanks, Mom, but I don't really have space for that here. His voice was polite, but it cut like scissors through fabric. I tucked the album away, feeling like I'd brought a child's toy to a boardroom. After that visit, things didn't snap back. They just kept fraying. Ethan's calls became less frequent, his texts shorter. Busy, talk later, or, yeah, I'm good. I told myself it was normal, that he was just growing up. But then came Thanksgiving of his sophomore year. I spent days preparing, scrubbed the house, bought a new tablecloth, made his favorite beef stew, the kind he used to beg for. Ethan arrived with Lauren, his new girlfriend. She was polite but distant, her eyes glued to her phone. Ethan kissed my cheek quickly, called me Mom, like it was an afterthought, and barely looked around the house. At dinner, I tried to make conversation. Did you get the care package I sent? Some cookies, a scarf I sewed? Ethan shrugged. Oh yeah, it was nice, but I don't really need that stuff anymore. Lauren smirked. He's not big on homemade vibes, she said, like it was a joke. I nodded, swallowing the sting. Later, while washing dishes, I saw the scarf I'd spent hours sewing in the trash, still folded, untouched. I didn't say anything. I just closed the lid and kept scrubbing. The worst came that night. The walls in our old house are thin and voices carry. I heard Lauren in the guest room, her tone light but sharp. Your mom's sweet, but this place is like stepping into the 80s. That stew, total grandma vibes. Ethan laughed, not cruelly, but enough to slice through me. Yeah, I keep telling her to modernize, but she's set in her ways. I stood there in the dark kitchen, hands wet with dishwater, listening to them laugh at the life I'd built. With every stitch, every sacrifice. They didn't mean to hurt me, not really. But that's what made it worse. The casual way they dismissed everything I was. After they left, something shifted. I stopped making excuses for Ethan's distance, stopped telling myself he was just busy or young. For the first time, I saw it clearly. I wasn't just fading from his life. I was being erased, like a pattern cut out and tossed aside. And the worst part? I didn't know how to stop it or if I even should. Graduation day came like a storm. I'd seen brewing but couldn't dodge. I'd marked it in my calendar months ago, circled in blue ink with a little star, back when I thought I'd be there, cheering until my voice gave out, maybe even crying happy tears as Ethan crossed the stage. Instead, I woke up to silence. No suitcase to pack, no dress to iron, no bus ticket to Atlanta. Just me, Maggie Sullivan, 60 years old, alone in a house that felt too big and too empty. I made coffee that morning, the same chipped mug I'd used for years, and stood by the kitchen window, staring at the backyard. The garden was a mess. Overgrown weeds, wilted flowers, a patch of dirt I'd meant to tend but never did. It looked like I felt neglected, forgotten. Ethan's text from 2 weeks ago still echoed in my head. It's easier this way. Easier for who? I wanted to scream it, but there was no one to hear. I checked the clock obsessively like I was late for something, but the truth was, I wasn't going anywhere. I tried to keep busy. I threaded my sewing machine, started on a neighbor's curtain order, but my hands wouldn't cooperate. The needle jammed, the threads snapped, and I gave up. Instead, I wandered to Ethan's old room where the air still smelled faintly of his cologne. On the shelf was the tin box, rusted at the edges, where I kept his childhood drawings. I opened it, my fingers brushing over crayon sketches of me with a crown, a star, a heart. "Mom is my star," he'd written in wobbly letters when he was 7. I held one drawing to my chest, and that's when the tears came, hot and relentless. Sank to the floor, the box in my lap, and let myself cry. Not just for the graduation I was missing, but for every moment that had slipped away. The notes I used to tuck in his backpack, the basketball games where he'd wave from the court, the nights we'd laugh over burnt cookies in the kitchen. Where had that Ethan gone? Had I loved him too much, too loudly, until I became something he needed to hide? Was I the embarrassment he couldn't face in front of his polished college friends? I'd always thought love was enough. I gave Ethan everything, my time, my strength, my sleep. I stayed up nights sewing to pay for his basketball camp, skipped meals so he could have new sneakers, smiled through exhaustion so he'd never see me break. But now, sitting there with his drawings, I wondered if I'd been foolish. If love, like mine, messy, patched together, worn at the edges, was something to be ashamed of, if I was something to be ashamed of, I didn't tell anyone how much it hurt. My best friend Ruth called to ask if I was excited for Ethan's big day, and I lied, said I wasn't feeling well enough to travel. She didn't push, but I saw the pity in her eyes when we met for coffee later. I couldn't bear to admit the truth. My own son didn't want me there. I didn't want anyone to look at me the way I was starting to look at myself, like a woman who'd given too much and ended up with nothing but an empty house and a broken heart. That evening, I sat on the back porch, a cup of tea gone cold, in my hands. The garden stretched out before me, wild and unkempt, like a mirror of my soul. The neighborhood was alive with sounds, kids laughing, a barbecue somewhere down the street, but it only made me feel smaller. I looked up at the sky, the stars just starting to peek through, and whispered, "Was I really that much to hide?" There was no answer, just the rustle of leaves and the ache of a question I couldn't shake. The day after Ethan's graduation, I avoided my phone. I didn't want to see the inevitable photos, smiling families, caps tossed in the air, all the joy I'd been cut out of. I spent the morning in my sewing room trying to focus on a hem, but my hands were clumsy, my heart too heavy. Around noon, Ruth texted me a link with a simple message. "Maggie, you need to see this." It was a video from the university's graduation ceremony, Ethan's name in the title. My stomach twisted. Watching him walk that stage without me there would be like ripping open a wound. But something, curiosity maybe, or desperation, made me click. The video opened with a sea of black gowns, cheers echoing through a packed auditorium. The camera panned across proud parents, their faces glowing, and I felt a pang, knowing I wasn't among them. Then Ethan's name was called. Ethan Sullivan, graduating with honors in business administration. There he was, my boy, tall and serious in his cap and gown, his smile tight, like it took effort. I leaned closer, my breath catching. He didn't just take his diploma and leave. He stepped to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the crowd. "I need to say something before I go," he started, his voice steady but thick with something I couldn't place. "I asked my mom not to come today." The room went quiet, and so did I, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might break. Ethan gripped the podium, his jaw tight, the way it always got when he was holding back tears. I told her it would be easier, less complicated, but I wasn't honest with her, or with myself. I froze, my hands shaking on the phone. He took a deep breath and continued. 3 years ago, I dropped out of school for a semester. I couldn't afford it, and I didn't want my mom to know. She'd already given up so much, her time, her health, her dreams, to get me here. I couldn't let her think she'd failed me. My mind reeled. Dropped out? Ethan had never said a word. "So I lied," he said, his voice breaking. "I pulled away, kept her at a distance, because I was ashamed, not of her, of me." Then came the twist that hit me like a bolt of lightning. "To get back to school, I applied for a scholarship," he said. "I wrote about my mom, about how she raised me alone, sewing late into the night, giving up everything so I could have a chance. I sent those letters under her name, Maggie Sullivan, because her story, her strength, was what inspired them to give me a second shot. She's the reason I'm standing here today." Tears streamed down my face as Ethan looked into the crowd, his eyes shining. "My mom is the strongest, most selfless woman I know. She stitched my life together, thread by thread, and I pushed her away to hide my own failure. Mom, if you're watching, I'm so sorry. I owe you everything, and I hope you'll forgive me." The crowd erupted in applause, but I barely heard it. I was sobbing, my phone trembling in my hands, torn between pride and pain. He'd dropped out. He carried that secret alone, built a wall between us to protect me from his shame. And those letters, my story, my sacrifices, used to lift him back up. I played the video again, then a third time, needing to believe it was real. Ethan hadn't been ashamed of me. He'd been ashamed of himself, and in his own way, he'd been trying to shield me. I didn't call him, not yet. Something in me needed time. I walked out to the backyard, where the garden was still a tangle of weeds, and stood there, letting the wind dry my tears. That afternoon I bought flower seeds, daisies, the kind Ethan used to pick for me when he was little. I started pulling. Weeds, not out of grief, but with purpose, like I was clearing space for something new. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, something I hadn't done since I was a girl. I opened an old journal and wrote, "He sees me. Maybe it's time I see myself." Ethan's words had cracked something open, but the real change wasn't about him. It was about me, Maggie, the woman who'd spent years stitching everyone else's dreams together. For the first time in a long time, I felt a spark, a quiet strength, telling me I didn't have to wait for his apology to start living again. 2 weeks after I saw Ethan's speech, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I peeked through the kitchen window and saw him step out, alone, no Lauren, just Ethan in a plain jacket, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavy. I opened the door, and we stood there for a moment, the air between us fragile, like a thread stretched too tight. He broke the silence first. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I was wrong about everything." I didn't rush to hug him or wave it away. I let his words settle, then nodded. "Come in," I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd served him beef stew years ago, where I'd cried alone on his graduation day. He looked at the table, then at me. "I meant every word in that speech," he said. "I dropped out because I couldn't face you, couldn't let you think you hadn't done enough, but pushing you away was the worst thing I've ever done." I took a breath. "Your shame wasn't mine to carry, Ethan," I said. "I gave you all I had so you could stand tall, not so you could hide me." He nodded, eyes wet, and reached into his bag. He slid a small booklet across the table. "I wrote this for you," he said. It was a published essay, "The Woman Who Sewed My Stars," about how my sacrifices shaped him. "It's not enough," he added, "but I want to rebuild if you'll." "Let me." I didn't say yes right away. I told him I needed time, not out of anger, but because I wasn't the same Maggie who'd waited by the phone. I'd started painting daisies in my art class, their petals bright against the canvas. I'd turned the backyard into a garden, daisies blooming where weeds once stood. I'd opened a savings account, just for me, and bought a new pair of shoes, not for anyone else, but because I deserved to walk without pain. A month later, I got an email from a local nonprofit. Ethan's essay had gone viral, and they wanted me to join a campaign called Hidden Heroes, celebrating single mothers. They flew a photographer to our town, and I stood in my garden, daisies at my back, for a portrait that ended up in newspapers across the state. Then came the news that took my breath away. They'd created the Maggie Sullivan Courage Fund, a scholarship for single moms going back to school. My name, my story, was helping others rise. One morning, I stood in my garden, watching a sparrow perch on the fence. The daisies swayed in the breeze, golden and unashamed. I went inside and hung my latest painting, a field of daisies, next to a photo of Ethan and me from his high school days. Below it, I taped a note from my journal. I am not invisible. I am enough. Ethan visits now, not often, but when he does, we talk as equals, not as a mother chasing a son's approval. I don't wait by the window anymore. I've learned that love doesn't mean shrinking yourself. It means standing tall, stitching your own stars, and letting the world see you shine.